What if happiness wasn't, this endless, often kind of exhausting pursuit of more pleasure, more stuff, more fleeting moments?
Hmm.
What if, and this feels really counterintuitive, what if it was actually about something much deeper, much more, well, accessible? Maybe even, surprisingly, about having less.
Yeah.
What if true joy isn't found in what you gain, but maybe in what you manage to let go of?
It's a pretty revolutionary thought, isn't it? Especially now.
Totally.
It just flies in the face of so much conventional wisdom, both back then and definitely today. And it's absolutely central to the philosophy we're going to really get into today.
Exactly. Today we're taking a deep dive into the, well, surprisingly nuanced and frankly, often shockingly misunderstood philosophy of Epicurus.
Hmm.
Born 341 BCE, died 270 BCE. His name today, as you probably know, conjures up these images of like unbridled excess, maybe even gluttony. You hear Epicurean, you think fine dining, sensual indulgence.
Right. The gourmet lifestyle.
Yeah. But that really couldn't be further from the truth of what he actually taught. His philosophy, his real philosophy, offered this pretty radical path to joy and serenity, a systematic approach to life that's just been widely misinterpreted for centuries.
So our mission today really is to peel back all those layers of historical misunderstanding, dismantle that popular caricature,
Right.
and reveal Epicurus's remarkably systematic, incredibly practical, and quite revolutionary approach to living a genuinely fulfilling, tranquil life. It's about trying to decode this ancient wisdom that honestly might hold some startling relevance for our own chaotic modern world.
And to really get Epicurus, to understand why his specific way of thinking resonated so deeply back then and why it felt so, I guess, urgently needed, we kind of need to set the historical stage first.
Definitely, context is everything here.
We're talking about the Hellenistic period, this sprawling, pretty turbulent era right after Alexander the Great died, so late 4th, early 3rd centuries BCE. What was that world actually like? And how did those huge shifts shape Epicurus' thinking?
Well, imagine a world just completely turned upside down. For centuries, Greek identity had been fundamentally tied to the polis, the independent city-state.
Yeah, like Athens, Sparta.
Exactly. And these weren't just places to live. They were like your political, social, spiritual home, your citizenship, your role in civic life, your connection to the community. That stuff defined you.
Okay.
But then Alexander comes along, conquers this vast territory, and then suddenly dies. And this whole fabric just unravels. His huge empire fragments into these massive, sprawling kingdoms ruled by his general.
Right. So instead of that stable, self-contained city-state where you knew your place, you had a role, a strong sense of belonging. Suddenly, individuals found themselves, adrift in these enormous, often impersonal kingdoms.
That's it, precisely. Adrift is a good word. That sense of belonging, that civic identity, just kind of evaporated for a lot of people.
Wow.
And this led to this profound sense of individual instability, a weakening of the old social ties, and a fundamental shift in, well, what people were worried about existentially.
Right.
Philosophy, which before had been really concerned with these grand, abstract questions, Plato looking for eternal forms, Aristotle digging into the ultimate purpose of things.
The big picture stuff.
The really big picture stuff, yeah. It started to turn inward. The burning questions for individuals weren't so much what's the perfect state or what's the ultimate cosmic good anymore. It was more like, how do I find inner peace in this chaotic, uncertain world?
How do I cope?
Exactly. How do I navigate my life, just me as an individual, facing all this uncertainty with less of that community feeling?
In Epicurus's philosophy was a direct response to that specific feeling, a system for that environment.
A direct and deeply systematic response. Yes, it wasn't just a collection of interesting ideas. He offered a very clear, pretty accessible system for individuals to find tranquility. And the key was living in harmony with themselves and, crucially, with what he saw as the fundamental laws of nature.
So like a personal compass when the big societal compass had gone totally haywire.
That's a great way to put it. He wasn't really interested in abstract speculation just for its own sake, or building these grand intellectual theories that didn't serve a direct human purpose.
Practicality was key.
Very much so. For him, philosophy was a tool, a practical guide for people trying to navigate a world that often felt overwhelming, maybe alienating, and just filled with anxiety. He offered a kind of philosophical sanctuary, his famous garden, where you could cultivate inner peace no matter what was going on outside.
Okay, let's really unpack this then. In a time when all those traditional anchors were dissolving, How did Epicurus' system uniquely address these deep human needs?
Yeah.
What made his path to serenity different from, say, the Stoics or the skeptics?
Well, at its absolute core, Epicurus saw philosophy not as abstract contemplation, but as this intensely practical discipline. It had one vital aim: solve human problems,
Okay.
primarily the problem of achieving happiness, serenity, and doing it in line with what he understood as natural laws. So unlike the Stoics, who you mentioned, they sought inner peace through strict virtue, duty, kind of resignation to fate.
Right. Accepting what you can't control.
Exactly. Or the skeptics, who basically questioned if we could know anything for sure. Epicurus offered this unique pleasure-based approach. But, and this is the crucial bit we need to keep coming back to, it wasn't pleasure in the way we usually think about it.
Not the common sense definition.
Not at all. It was deeply rooted in understanding the natural world, in the belief that if you accurately understood how the universe actually worked, and if you truly understood human nature, you could systematically eliminate the sources of your suffering and discover this true, lasting contentment.
And this is exactly where that huge popular misconception about pleasure comes crashing in, isn't it? People hear Epicurean hedonism and they immediately picture, I don't know, Roman emperors at lavish feasts, endless indulgence, just chasing every sensual gratification.
Yeah, the stereotype is powerful.
But that's not what he meant at all. In fact, trying to live like that, Epicurus would say you're doing the exact opposite of what leads to real pleasure.
You've hit the nail on the head. That's the fundamental misreading. For Epicurus, true pleasure, the goal of life, is not the pursuit of fleeting, intense, sensual gratification. It's almost the opposite.
Okay.
It's about the absence of pain, both physical pain and, just as importantly, mental pain or disturbance. And it's about achieving tranquility. It's a state of being, a steady, calm equilibrium, not a roller coaster of intense highs that inevitably lead to lows.
So those intense pleasures, he saw them
As temporary disruptions, actually, disruptions to this peaceful state, often followed by pain, maybe regret, or just the anxiety of wanting more, of needing that next hit.
Huh. So it's not about adding more intense feelings. It's about systematically removing what causes discomfort and disturbance, like clearing out the mental and physical clutter.
Exactly. It's subtraction, not addition, in a way. And this brings us to two of his absolute core concepts, the ones that really get misunderstood. The first is ataraxia.
Ataraxia, okay.
This is spiritual tranquility. It's a profound freedom from anxiety and fear, especially fear of things like death or divine punishment or just the unknown future.
So an unshakable inner peace, a kind of calm that holds up even when things outside are turbulent.
That's it. It's this state that Epicurus believed ensures your spiritual freedom, and it's the very foundation of true happiness. A quietness of the soul, deep inner calm that's resilient. And you get there by understanding the world rationally and by managing your desires and fears.
Okay, so ataraxia is the mental side. What's the physical counterpart?
That would be aponia, A-P-O-N-I-A. This is simply the state of the body being free from pain.
Ah, okay.
So while ataraxia deals with the mind, the spirit, aponia is about physical well-being, freedom from hunger, thirst, cold, physical discomfort. It's not about surrounding yourself with luxury, but about having your basic physical needs met so your body isn't a source of distraction or suffering.
And he believed that true, lasting pleasure comes from the combination of both ataraxia and aponia.
That's the key insight.
That makes so much more sense when you put it like that.
Yeah.
I mean, if your body is in agony or your mind is just consumed by gnawing fear, how can you possibly feel content, let alone pleasure? It's almost impossible.
Exactly. And that's why, for Epicurus, pleasure does not mean chasing insatiable desires or luxury or excessive thrills. He saw those pursuits as leading straight to the opposite of pleasure, to restlessness, dissatisfaction, craving, new kinds of pain.
Right.
Think about it, right? The more you chase those intense, fleeting highs, the more you kind of build up a tolerance, the more you need to feel satisfied, and the more anxious you become about losing what you have or not getting what you want next.
The treadmill.
It's a treadmill. So instead, his philosophy advocated for making moderate, conscious, rational choices. The goal isn't to get more stuff or more intense experiences. It's to prevent suffering, both spiritual and physical, by identifying and eliminating the root causes. It's a disciplined, thoughtful approach to life that prioritizes the sustainable, gentle well-being over those transient, exhausting highs.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, and I think profoundly relevant to how we live today. It's not about more, it's about less. What does that actually mean for how we live, especially now in a world that's constantly screaming at us to pursue more, accumulate more, strive for more external validation, more possessions? It feels like a radical challenge to our whole consumer culture.
Oh, it absolutely is a direct challenge. And it means we need to really understand our desires, critically examine them. And Epicurus had this brilliant, absolutely essential classification of desires. Understanding this is kind of the first practical step towards inner peace in his system.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the first category?
First, we have the natural and necessary desires.
Natural and necessary. Sounds like the absolute basics.
They are. These are the fundamental needs, absolutely essential for survival, yes, but also for just peaceful living. We're talking basic food, water, simple shelter, basic health. These are non-negotiable for tranquility. If you don't satisfy these, a peaceful life is just impossible. You're constantly uncomfortable or afraid or in actual physical pain. So for Epicurus, these must be satisfied. And their satisfaction brings this deep, stable kind of pleasure, the pleasure of aponia, freedom from physical pain. Think about how incredibly good a simple glass of water tastes when you're truly thirsty.
Yeah, or just feeling safe and warm.
Exactly. Or the relief of a warm bed after a long, cold day. That is the kind of foundational pleasure he valued most. Simple, necessary, and deeply satisfying.
Makes perfect sense. You can't find inner peace if you're starving or freezing. That's the baseline. Okay, once those basic needs are met, what's the next level?
Next up are the natural but not necessary desires.
Natural but not necessary. Okay.
So these are still natural. They relate to our physical or psychological makeup, but they aren't vital for just bare survival. However, they can add to our happiness and enjoyment if we approach them in the right way.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so think about enjoying a really delicious, well-prepared meal, as opposed to just basic fuel.
Mhm.
Or having comfortable, maybe aesthetically pleasing living conditions instead of just minimal shelter. It could be a comfortable chair, interesting conversation with friends, a beautiful piece of music, a pleasant view.
Things that enhance life, but you could technically live without them.
Exactly. Life can absolutely continue without them, but their moderate, thoughtful fulfillment can contribute to a deeper sense of well-being, of contentment. The absolute key here, though, is moderation and the ability to enjoy them when they're present, but not suffer or feel deprived when they're absent. They enhance life without becoming a source of craving or anxiety or pain if they're not available.
So it's okay to enjoy that nice meal. But the problem starts when the desire for a gourmet meal every night becomes a source of intense anxiety or dissatisfaction if all you have is simple food.
Precisely.
Or maybe needing the absolute latest smartphone, not because your old one is broken, but purely for the status or the novelty of it.
You're anticipating the third category perfectly. That leads us right to the unnatural and unnecessary desires, sometimes called vain or empty desires.
Oh, okay. The problematic ones.
For Epicurus, these are the most problematic. These are artificial desires. They're largely shaped by society, by culture, by peer pressure, by advertising, not by our inherent nature. Think about the relentless pursuit of unlimited wealth, immense political power, widespread fame, luxurious possessions far beyond what's truly comfortable or useful.
The very things our modern society often holds up as the ultimate goals.
Mhm.
The markers of success, fulfillment, happiness, the stuff that bombards you on social media constantly.
Exactly. And Epicurus was incredibly critical of these. He argued pretty forcefully that they rarely, if ever, lead to true happiness. In fact, he thought they almost inevitably result in unrest, insatiable cravings, bitter rivalry, fear of loss, and profound dissatisfaction.
Why? Because they have no natural limit.
That's a huge part of it. Because they're artificial, they're potentially infinite, you can never truly satisfy them, no matter how much wealth you get, or fame, or power. There's always more you could have. There's always someone else who seems to have more. And there's the constant anxiety of losing what you've gained. This just leads to this perpetual state of striving, comparing, anxiety, which is utterly toxic to ataraxia.
So his practical advice then was to actively abandon these artificial desires, recognize them as illusions, as traps, and instead focus on a moderate, nature-aligned life centered on those easily satisfiable natural needs. It's kind of radical contentment.
Precisely. Radical contentment is a good phrase for it. This classification wasn't just some intellectual exercise for Epicurus and his followers in the garden. It was an incredibly powerful, practical, protective mechanism, especially for individuals living in that turbulent Hellenistic period.
How so?
By understanding which desires were truly necessary for sustainable well-being and which were just culturally imposed, ultimately self-defeating illusions, individuals could kind of shield themselves, protect themselves from the spiritual fragility, the anxiety that the era so often induced. It was like a roadmap to self-sufficiency, to inner strength, to freedom from external pressures in a world that offered very little external security or clear social paths. It really was about figuring out what was truly enough.
Wow. So a massive part of his ethical system is just about truly understanding ourselves, what we need versus what society or maybe our own egos tell us we want. It's a profound call for self-awareness,
Mm.
for critical thinking about our own motivations.
Mm.
But Epicurus didn't just stop at ethics and psychology, did he?
Mm.
His understanding of the cosmos, his physics, also played a central role in achieving this inner peace, almost like a scientific underpinning for tranquility.
He absolutely did. For Epicurus, understanding the true structure of the universe, the actual nature of reality, was fundamental, absolutely essential for overcoming our deepest human fears. And the two biggest fears he wanted to systematically dismantle were the fear of death and the fear of divine punishment or interference from the gods.
Two pretty universal anxiety.
Exactly. And he believed these pervasive fears were largely born from ignorance, from superstitious beliefs about how the world actually works. His thinking was, if you understand the universe correctly, rationally, those fears will simply dissolve. They lose their power.
And to get that correct understanding, he adopted and significantly developed the atom theory. That must have been quite radical back then.
Oh, it was hugely radical. He built upon the ideas of earlier thinkers, the pre-Socratic atomists like Democritus and Leucippus, but he really refined them and integrated them tightly into his whole ethical system.
Okay.
So for Epicurus, the universe is composed solely of two things: infinite, indivisible particles, which he called atoms, and empty space. The void. That's it.
Atoms and void.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Nothing else fundamental. These atoms are eternal, they were never created, they can't be destroyed, and they are in constant eternal motion through the void. All of material reality, everything we see, touch, experience, including ourselves, arises simply from the combination, the separation, and the movement of these atoms.
So no need for a divine creator, no grand design orchestrated by some higher power.
Nope. It's all the result of these primarily mechanical but also inherently spontaneous atomic interactions over infinite time.
Okay, so the world is fundamentally just tiny, moving particles governed by natural laws. But what about human freedom? Free will. If everything is just atoms bouncing around, obeying physical laws, doesn't that lock us into a purely deterministic universe where every thought, every action is just predetermined, making free will an illusion? That was a big philosophical problem even then, right?
You've put your finger on a critical objection, and one that Epicurus brilliantly addressed. This is where he introduced a truly innovative and much discussed concept: the Klinemen, or the swerve.
The swerve. Okay, what's that?
Yeah. He proposed that atoms, while mostly moving in predictable paths, maybe downwards due to weight, occasionally and unpredictably, spontaneously exhibit this tiny, random, infinitesimally small deviation. A little swerve from their straight line motion.
A tiny bit of atomic wiggle room, a moment of pure randomness in the cosmic dance.
Exactly, like a little hiccup in the system.
Hmm.
And the significance of this swerve is profound. First, it ensures the universe isn't entirely mechanical or predetermined. It introduces an element of genuine spontaneity, of novelty, into the very fabric of reality.
Okay.
And crucially for human beings, it provides a physical basis for free will. If our thoughts and actions were just the inevitable outcome of a strict, unbroken chain of atomic collisions, then things like moral responsibility, genuine choice, agency, they'd be impossible. We'd just be complex machines.
Right.
But the Klinemen, the swerve, allows for our minds, which are also made of atoms, remember particularly fine, mobile atoms, to initiate new chains of causation. It gives us genuine freedom to choose, to act in a way that's distinct from just mechanical reaction. It sort of breaks the chain of necessity, preserving human liberty within his materialist worldview.
Wow, that's a huge philosophical move, allowing for real freedom within a universe made entirely of matter.
Okay, so how did this atomistic view, especially with the swerve, directly help people overcome those big fears, the fear of gods and the fear of death, which he saw as major roadblocks to happiness?
Very directly, with a kind of liberating clarity, actually. Let's take the gods first. Epicurus did believe gods existed, but not in the way most people feared them.
How did he see them?
He envisioned them as these blessed, perfectly tranquil, completely content beings, made of very fine atoms, living in the spaces between worlds, what he called the intermundia. But crucially, they are completely self-sufficient and totally detached from human affairs.
Completely. They didn't create the world. They don't intervene in it. They don't punish us. They don't reward us. They're utterly unaffected by our prayers or sacrifices. They're just living in bliss, unconcerned with us.
So fearing their wrath or trying to win their favor is pointless.
Utterly pointless. A profound waste of emotional energy, according to Epicurus. They aren't concerned with us, so we, in turn, shouldn't be concerned with them, except maybe to admire their perfect state of ataraxia as a kind of ideal. This instantly removes a massive source of anxiety for people living in a world often steeped in superstitious dread.
Okay, so no divine punishment, no angry gods to appease, no constantly worrying if you've offended some cosmic power. That definitely eliminates a huge chunk of existential anxiety for a lot of people then and now. What about death? That's maybe the most universal human fear.
Right. And for death, Epicurus had this famously simple yet profound argument. He basically said, when we exist, death is not yet present. When death is present, then we do not exist.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
His atomic theory led him to believe that death is simply the cessation of sensory experience and consciousness. When we die, the atoms that make up our body and our mind, our soul, they just disperse. They separate and go back into the great cosmic whirl.
So consciousness, awareness just stops.
It just dissolves. Since consciousness ends, there can be no pain, no suffering, no awareness of being dead. We literally will not experience death. Therefore, he argued, there is absolutely no rational reason to fear death itself. The fear of death is really just a fear of some future sensation or suffering, which by definition won't exist for us once we're gone.
It's nothing to us.
Exactly. Death is nothing to us. That was his famous line. This profoundly simple logic offers this powerful, rational balm against one of humanity's deepest, most primal anxieties.
So by rationally understanding nature, that the world is atoms and void, that there's room for free will thanks to the swerve, that gods are detached and don't interfere, and that death is simply the end of sensation and therefore nothing to fear, you can directly reduce your spiritual fears and achieve greater happiness, greater tranquility. It's almost like a therapeutic, scientific approach to peace of mind.
It truly is. His physics wasn't just some abstract academic exercise. It was the intellectual foundation for liberating people from fear and anxiety. It enabled individuals to live more fully, more calmly in the present moment. He believed this rational understanding was absolutely paramount for achieving that unshakable peace of ataraxia.
Okay, that makes sense. But how did he propose we acquire this knowledge, this accurate understanding of the world? What was his theory of knowledge, his epistemology? How did he think we could verify what's real?
Right. Well, for Epicurus, knowledge begins primarily with sensory perceptions. Our senses, sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell, these are our direct, immediate connection to reality. They're the initial intake valves for information from the world.
And did he think the senses were reliable? Because, you mentioned the skeptics earlier, and other philosophers argued that our senses can deceive us, that they can't really be trusted as a source of truth, like the stick in water appearing bent.
That's a crucial distinction. Epicurus held that the senses themselves are inherently reliable. They don't lie. When you see something, you are indeed seeing it. Your eyes are faithfully transmitting the atomic images or effluences coming off objects. The perception itself is true. It's a direct physical interaction.
So where do errors come from, like the bent stick example?
Errors arise not from the senses themselves, but from our interpretations, our judgments, our opinions based on those perceptions. In the case of the stick in water, your senses are accurately reporting the visual data of light refracting through water. The error comes when your mind judges or interprets that data to mean the stick is actually bent, rather than understanding the property of light and water that cause that appearance. We add opinions to the raw data.
Ah, okay. So the raw sense data is fine. It's our mental processing, our judgment about it that can go wrong.
Precisely. And similarly, when we misinterpret sensations like fear or pleasure, mistaking fleeting excitement for true happiness, for instance, we make errors in judgment about what will genuinely bring us tranquility.
So his epistemology, his theory of knowledge, it formed the basis for a pretty rational and empirical method, both for science and for philosophy. It's about careful, clear observation and then careful, logical reasoning about those observations, trying not to let our preconceptions or fears or hasty judgments distort the picture.
That's exactly it. Epicurus believed that accurate knowledge of natural reality, grounded in reliable sensory experience and sound reasoning, what he called prolepsis or preconceptions, which are basically concepts derived from repeated sense experiences, is absolutely necessary. Necessary to overcome those fears, especially of gods and death, and necessary to live a virtuous, which for him meant tranquil life.
He wasn't interested in abstract debates with no payoff for human well-being.
Not at all. His philosophy, including his epistemology, was fundamentally pragmatic. It was all geared towards finding that inner calm, that ataraxia.
Okay, so what does all this mean for us today? How does understanding atoms and the nature of desire and the reliability of our senses, how does that help us live a better life,
Yeah.
beyond just maybe alleviating the fear of death or ancient gods we don't really worry about in the same way?
Well, I think it gives us a really concrete, observation-based, rational framework for understanding our world and maybe more importantly, understanding ourselves. Unlike a lot of the metaphysical thought of his time, which often relied on, abstract reasoning divorced from experience or maybe divine revelation, Epicurus championed this critical approach, rooted in what we can directly perceive and what we can logically deduce from the natural world.
Okay.
And that methodology allows us or encourages us to accurately assess what truly brings pleasure, that enduring absence of pain and anxiety, versus what is merely a fleeting, unnecessary desire that often ends up leading to more suffering. It encourages us to base our decisions on tangible reality, on evidence, rather than on superstitious fears or societal pressures or just unfounded beliefs. And that empowers us to make choices that genuinely contribute to our own ataraxia and aponia. In essence, it's a method for truly knowing what's good for you in a practical, grounded way, and for developing a kind of intellectual self-sufficiency in a world that's just full of conflicting information and persuasive external influences trying to tell you what you should want or fear.
Look at the world as it is, not as you fear it might be or as others tell you it should be.
That's a great summary of it.
It really sounds like he was way ahead of his time in some respects, advocating for almost a scientific method applied to personal well-being and happiness. But as we know, profound philosophies often get twisted or simplified or even outright villainized through history, don't they?
Oh, absolutely.
How did Epicurus' legacy actually fare over the centuries, especially with that hedonist label sticking so firmly?
You've identified a classic, maybe tragic case study in philosophical misinterpretation. Initially, actually, in the Roman era, his ideas gained significant traction, real influence.
Really? How so?
Well, largely thanks to one brilliant Roman poet, Lucretius. His massive, incredible, epic poem on the nature of things, De Rerum Natura, masterfully laid out Epicurus's entire system, the physics, the ethics, all of it, in vivid, powerful, accessible verse.
Wow, a poetic guide to Epicureanism.
Pretty much. It was like a manual for living the Epicurean way, explaining atomism, the Klanomon, the nature of the gods, the liberation from fear of death. It made Epicurus's sometimes complex thought not just understandable, but beautiful, compelling to a wide Roman intellectual audience. And remember, they, much like the Hellenistic Greeks, were often seeking individual peace within a vast, sometimes impersonal empire. So, many Romans were genuinely drawn to its promise of inner peace and freedom from superstition.
Okay, so he had a good run for a while, especially in Rome. But then, the Middle Ages. And this is where I'm guessing things took a sharp downturn for his reputation.
A very sharp downturn, indeed. And this is where that profound, enduring misinterpretation really started to crystallize and harden. From a Christian perspective, especially during the often fiercely ascetic and dogmatic Middle Ages, Epicurus's pleasure-based ethics were just widely and vehemently condemned.
Because pleasure sounded like sin.
Exactly. His emphasis on pleasure was fundamentally misconstrued as a pursuit of worldly, carnal, sinful desires. Completely ignoring his careful definitions of ataraxia and aponia, ignoring his profound call for moderation, simplicity, rational choice.
Right. They missed the whole absence of pain part.
Completely missed it or willfully ignored it. And of course, the idea of not fearing death or believing the gods were uninvolved, that was seen as deeply sacrilegious, atheistic even. So this led to this long, dark period of disrepute for Epicurus. His philosophy was largely dismissed, actively vilified, or just ignored. His true intent, that emphasis on tranquility and freedom from pain, was almost totally erased from the public mind, replaced by this caricature of gluttony and debauchery.
What's fascinating there, though, is how a really nuanced philosophy, designed specifically to liberate people from fear and excess, could be so utterly distorted, just turned into its opposite by later interpretations, almost erasing its true meaning, simply because it used a word like pleasure in a specific technical way. It's a powerful lesson, isn't it, about how ideas get shaped and warped and sometimes weaponized by the dominant cultural, religious, political forces of an era.
Absolutely. The very word Epicurean itself, even today, still often carries those connotations of indulgence, luxury, fine food, rather than the measured tranquility and simple living Epicurus actually advocated. It's a testament to the lasting power of that misrepresentation.
But thankfully, his ideas weren't totally lost forever. They resurfaced.
Thankfully, no. The Renaissance and the Enlightenment were definitely a turning point. With their renewed interest in classical thought and the rising emphasis on reason, empiricism, and science, things started to shift.
How so?
During these periods, with the resurgence of classical learning and, really importantly, the rise of the natural sciences, Epicurus's atomism and his natural philosophy were rediscovered. And they were greatly appreciated by thinkers who were looking for alternatives to, say, medieval scholasticism or purely religious dogma.
They saw something valuable there.
They did. Thinkers like Pierre Gassendi, a French philosopher and scientist in the 17th century, explicitly revived Epicurean atomism. He argued it was compatible with Christian thought if you separated physics from metaphysics, and he worked hard to rehabilitate Epicurus's ethical system, showing its emphasis on virtue and prudence. Other Enlightenment figures admired his empirical approach to knowledge, his focus on human happiness based on reason and nature. They began to see the remarkable scientific foresight in his atomic theory and his empirical method as a kind of precursor to their own scientific revolution.
So he wasn't just seen as a philosopher of ethics anymore, but also as a vital precursor to modern science in some ways, and a powerful voice for a rational, human-centered morality.
He was indeed. In modern philosophy and science, Epicurus is now pretty widely recognized as a truly important figure, a pioneer of nature-based rational ethics, someone who laid crucial groundwork for the scientific method even. His human-centered, nature-aligned, rational understanding of pleasure again, as the absence of disturbance coupled with his incredibly practical methods for shedding fear. That remains profoundly valuable today, in modern ethics, but also in psychology.
How so in psychology?
Well, think about how many contemporary therapeutic approaches echo his ideas. Aspects of cognitive behavioral therapy, for instance, focus intensely on identifying and challenging irrational fears and beliefs that cause distress, very Epicurean. Mindfulness practices emphasize being present, recognizing sufficiency, detaching from excessive desires.
Right. Accepting things, not striving constantly.
Exactly. Or even think about modern minimalist movements advocating for shedding unnecessary possessions and desires to find freedom and contentment. These all echo, in various ways, the core wisdom Epicurus offered over 2 millennia ago.
So it really wasn't just a random collection of ideas about pleasure and atoms. Epicurus's philosophy was this systematic, cohesive, holistic structure. And it deeply influenced Western thought, even if sometimes indirectly, or through layers of misinterpretation.
Without a doubt, he took these abstract concepts, happiness, tranquility, and transformed them into concrete, applicable goals, always trying to align them with natural laws and a pretty keen understanding of human psychology. He saw philosophy as so much more than just a theoretical pursuit, an intellectual game.
It was a way of life.
For him, it was a practical guide, a comprehensive toolkit, really, designed to actually transform your life, to liberate your soul from its most pervasive anxieties and fears.
And the ultimate goal of that practical guide was always to help individuals overcome those irrational fears, avoid unnecessary suffering, abandon that endless, unsatisfying chase after artificial desires, and ultimately live a rational, moderate, and profoundly peaceful life. It really is a philosophy for navigating the human condition itself.
Exactly. His human-centered, nature-aligned, rational understanding of pleasure, it formed a cornerstone of philosophical thought, not just in his time, but echoing down through the centuries. And his universal messages about how to live a happy and peaceful life, they continue to be incredibly important sources, I think, for modern ethics, for psychology, even for how we think about our relationship with the natural world. It's a testament to the enduring power and the practical utility of his insights, even after being hidden under centuries of misunderstanding.
We've taken a really deep dive into Epicurus, and I think it's clearer than ever that his message is just far, far richer than that simple, misleading eat, drink, and be merry tag. We've seen how he radically redefined pleasure, not as indulgence, but as that serene absence of pain and anxiety, araxia and aponia.
Right.
We've explored the crucial role that understanding nature, his physics, played in conquering fears, especially the fear of death and the fear of meddling gods. And how his atomistic view, even with that subtle swerve, offered a path to both cosmic understanding and personal freedom.
Yeah.
And we've also really understood the profound wisdom and maybe the practical necessity of distinguishing our truly essential, easily satisfied desires from those artificial, insatiable ones that just lead to unrest and dissatisfaction.
Epicurus offered us, really, not just a philosophy, but what amounts to a comprehensive toolkit for living a genuinely fulfilled and, importantly, fearless life. He passionately argued that the key to real peace lies within our grasp. It's not primarily about external circumstances changing.
It's internal.
It's internal. It's about diligently controlling our desires, recognizing what truly contributes to our well-being versus what detracts from it, and cultivating this rational, clear-eyed understanding of our place in the natural world. It's a profoundly empowering message, actually. It places the power for happiness firmly back in your own hands and your own mind.
So as you, our listener, reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider this provocative thought, especially for our hyper-connected, often pretty overwhelming world today. In a time that's just overflowing with endless information, constant stimulation, almost infinite array of often artificial desires being thrown at you. What practical steps can you take, starting today, from Epicurus' deep wisdom to achieve your own ataraxia, your own inner peace? How might his ancient insights about stripping away the non-essential, about rationally understanding fear instead of being ruled by it, about finding contentment in what is simple and sufficient, how might those insights help you navigate the unique fears, the anxieties, the constant societal pressures of modern life, and maybe finally find that coveted inner peace he talked about?